Welcome to the Bible and Theology Matters podcast,
where we discuss all things Bible and theology.
Because it matters. What you really believe determines how you really behave.
Now, here is your host, Associate Professor of Bible Exposition at Dallas Theological Seminary
and Professor of Bible and Theology for the National Theological College and Graduate School,
Dr. Paul Weaver.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is when you're watching or listening to this podcast. I'm your host, Paul Weaver. On today's episode, it is a pleasure to have back Dr. Tom Woodward on the program to continue our discussion on the intelligent design movement. If you've not listened to the first part of this two-part podcast series, I encourage you and invite you to go back and listen to that first episode first, as today's program will be building upon that previous conversation. Dr. Woodward is a fellow of the Discovery Institute in Seattle, Washington. He has spoken in over 80 universities and in 40 countries. He's been the research professor at Trinity College of Florida. Dr. Woodward is the author of Doubts About Darwin, which Christianity Today gave the Honor of the Book of the Year award in 2004. And Dr. Woodward is also the author of Darwin Strikes Back, and his most recent book is entitled The Mysterious Epigenome, subtitled What Lies Beyond DNA. Please join me and watch this previously recorded episode. Well, in your book, Doubts About Darwin, followed by your book, Darwin Strikes Back, which, by the way, for our listeners, are both available on Amazon, you trace from the 1960s onward the birth and rapid spread of intelligent design as a new paradigm, a new organizing concept in the study of origins. So can you give us this big picture? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is when you're watching or listening to this podcast. I'm your host, Paul Weaver. On today's episode, it is a pleasure to have back Dr. Tom Woodward on the program to continue our discussion on the intelligent design movement. If you've not listened to the first part of this two-part podcast series, I encourage you and invite you to go back and listen to that first episode first, as today's program will be building upon that previous conversation. Dr. Woodward is a fellow of the Discovery Institute in Seattle, Washington. He has spoken in over 80 universities and in 40 countries. He's been the research professor at Trinity College of Florida and had led the C.S. Lewis Society that was established at Princeton University, but later moved to Trinity College campus in 1990. Dr. Woodward is the author of Doubts About Darwin, which Christianity Today gave the Honor of the Book of the Year award in 2004. And Dr. Woodward is also the author of Darwin Strikes Back, and his most recent book is entitled The Mysterious Epigenome, subtitled What Lies Beyond DNA. Please join me and watch this previously recorded episode.
Back in the 60s, there was already a movement, and I think you and I have discussed this a little bit. John Whitcomb of Grace Seminary, Dwayne Gish worked with him, Henry Morris, who's of course passed, but I think his son has played a role in leading the Institute for Creation Research. So they were doing great work along the way. But then in the late 80s, because especially in the mid 80s when Michael Denton's book exploded, I mentioned Evolution, a Theory in Crisis, which, by the way, he did a new edition of it. I don't know if you heard the name of that. Evolution, Still a Theory in Crisis. I thought that was really funny. And he actually threw in a lot of, about a third of the book is all new stuff. It's terrific. But Michael Denton is still active and lecturing. He's, I think, around 80, 82. It looks like he's in 32, and he's incredible dynamic abilities that God has given him. But his work sparked, and then Thaxton, Charles Thaxton, Bradley, and Olson, their two other co-authors, wrote The Mystery of Life's Origin. Those were the two spark plugs that started the engine in the 1980s. And then God brought to faith originally about 1982, I think, Phil Johnson. And by 1987, he was in England and discovered the book by Michael Denton, was sparked to devote a whole year researching this Darwin theory, even though he's a professor of criminal law and criminal procedure at Berkeley Law School. So he's a little bit out of his field, but he does have the ability to analyze evidence and to spot hidden assumptions. See, that's the key. What are the assumptions? What are the unspoken things taken for granted that are stuffed inside, as it were, this black bag that the Darwinists don't want to bring out and open it up and put it on the table? And so when Philip Johnson analyzed this, he said, I got to write a whole book. He actually had a wonderful Christian wife. And she said, but this is not your specialty. And he said, yeah, I know. And they probably will not listen to me. No one will read my book, and I'll just say the devil made me do it when I write the book. And the next day he started writing. Well, so Phil Johnson did produce a fantastic book, and it was my textbook for about 15 years at Trinity College. It's still one of the best books. It's called Darwin on Trial. Mm-hmm. You may have heard of it. It is a classic, and Darwin on Trial is even in Spanish, called Proceso a Darwin, if anybody wants to get it in Spanish. So basically, Philip Johnson then he was the super magnet, and pretty soon, these other scholars were just being drawn in because he was the gifted, he was the C.S. Lewis of intelligent design. He was the ultra beyond brilliant architect of the whole movement and laid the foundation. For 10 years, he led it until he had a couple of strokes that debilitated him. And he still did a little bit after that, but not much. In the year 2000, he kind of retired. But then these young guys, Dembski, Meyer, Jonathan Wells, and especially Michael Behe, whom we'll discuss, these brilliant, beyond brilliant scientists were being brought in and were comparing notes and were encouraging one another. And the thing just took off. It just spread. And the publications were on track until a court case kind of derailed the public's take on it and actually kind of put the Darwinists to sleep, in my opinion. And that whole matter came up in the early 2000s. But then the movement has just continued to build and spread through scholars like Doug Axe and others that I could name.
Listeners and viewers will need to check out your books, Doubts About Darwin, Darwin Strikes Back, and learn more about that. Stephen Meyer, I think I saw on my feed post, social media post or feed that he's recently been interviewed on a program I think is coming up. Piers Morgan.
In the past year, he has been interviewed by some of the very, very top podcasters in the entire world.
Yeah.
And his new book, on the God hypothesis, the return of the God hypothesis, I think is one of the reasons that has opened up people to listen to him. Maybe not instantly convert, but Steve Meyer is, how should we describe him? He's the vanguard. He's the top articulating speaker, leader of the intelligent design movement.
Well, Dr. Woodward, as you know, as far as evidence for design, probably the biggest breakthrough, as you've already mentioned the name Mike Behe, his work recorded in his book, Darwin's Black Box. And this book brought up the idea of complex machines that have a mousetrap type of complexity. So would you give a summary about who Behe is and what his big idea of that book is?
Sure. If I could recommend another video overview of his work, it's called Revolutionary. That's kind of a funny name for a science video. But Behe's work is revolutionary in the sense that he stirred up more talk. He has caused more, I don't know if I would I guess I can call it controversy, than any other design scholar because, number one, he teaches at a fairly elite university, Lehigh University. They're north of Philly, north of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. It's in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And so we have actually taped interviews with him. He has been a master writer who's also a fantastic scientist and is very articulate, bold, and courageous to let you know, everybody in the world know that there is now inescapable, I think he would even say undeniable, to borrow the phrase for Doug Axe's book, evidence that at least certain things in living cells could not have evolved because they have so many interacting parts. He talks about the mousetrap that has a base. It has the hammer that does the squishing job. It has the very important spring. Without the spring, the thing will not have any force or power. It has the catch that holds it back, and then the holding bar that holds it, and then the little catch that fits with it. 5 parts, and I'm leaving out the cheese, okay, and some of the staples, okay. But it has at least 5 parts. You can't use a block of wood to start catching a mouse, and then bring in another piece, and then bring in. You can't evolve the mousetrap. All 5 parts have to be there, and this is called irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity means a level of complexity that does a function wherein a step-by-step building up of that complexity cannot be conceived. You cannot even imagine a pathway of slowly, step-by-step evolving a mousetrap. So that's just one physical example. What he does in his book, Darwin's Black Box, released in 1996 with a revised edition 2006, he just literally, that was the ultra 50 megaton H-bomb of the whole intelligent design campaign, because he demonstrated through 8 different areas of biology, like the flagellar machine, this outboard motor that drives bacteria through the watery environment of our intestines. That motor requires 40 different parts. Each one is a very sophisticated protein. They all fit together, lock and key. And he goes on and gives other examples. I mean, I won't go into them. There's a cascade going on in the retina of our eye that allows a single photon of light to generate the current, across the optic nerve to the brain. There's a cascade of 20 proteins that set up a blood clot. How could you evolve such a system step by step? The thing doesn't work until all 20 proteins, each one having their own DNA, code, their own DNA blueprint. What I point out is that, B's not even talking about the chance of getting all the spelling right of those 2,000 or 3,000 letters for each protein. I mean, it's so overwhelmingly implausible that blind processes of any kind. So that's what Darwin's Black Box did. Then he brought out The Edge of Evolution in 2008. And then in 2019, I believe it was, the third major book is Darwin Devolves, which was the death knell, because he says that you cannot show any example of nature where new proteins are being built, new DNA has been just orchestrated and just fit together. The only micro changes that are taking is when DNA is broken or blunted or squished or dented, and therefore it does a kind of a weird thing. And so these animals, like a polar bear, can scamper off to the Arctic and exist there because they have lost the ability to grow a coat of fur with melanin on it. Okay? So it's broken DNA. In other words, Darwin's theory isn't going up. The only Darwinian things that we see happening are going down. They're devolving. So that's Behe in a nutshell. And I think his arguments have successfully weathered the storm of criticism. And I can go further if needed.
Yeah, well, how about that? How have Darwinians, those who hold to Darwinian evolution, what has been their response to Behe's arguments?
One thing that they've done is guilt by association. For example, Richard Dawkins, you mentioned, the idea of, people coming to faith with the help of this cranky atheist. Richard Dawkins was asked by a friend of mine, a professor who's written a lot of books. His professor stood up and Dawkins said, "Well, what do you say?" Because he was, going on about evolution. "What do you say about Dr. Behe and all he's brought out about irreducible complexity?" And his answer to the whole audience, this packed auditorium, was, "Well, Michael Behe is a Roman Catholic Christian." And then he paused, like maybe for 2 or 3 seconds to let that sink in. So he wants this to be true, blah, blah, blah. And so he's trying to produce a kind of a background, subtle spin doctoring attempt to say this is all due to his religion. Well, the funny thing is, his Catholic teachers from junior high, high school, collegiate, and onward were always saying, yeah, God worked through evolution. It wasn't until he read a book by an Australian doctor, medical doctor and geneticist, and I think you know who this guy is, Michael Denton. So remember the bombshell that started the whole movement, the evolutionary theory in crisis? So Michael Behe was led to doubt Darwin by this agnostic writer, Michael Denton. But of course, my friend didn't bring that out. He could have. He knew enough to do that. But it's just, and then there's a lot of nitpicks, and all the nitpicks, I would say every single one, probably over 100, have flopped, have failed, have fizzled, have been proven wrong. And he wrote a fourth book to show that, where he takes on about 85 of these critics, and he basically squashes them into the ground, in my humble opinion.
Interesting. Very good. Well, the argument that, what Dawkins does, just discounting someone because they come from a Catholic background, sounds like theologically liberal people who attack Scripture say it's just a theological work, so we can't trust anything in it. And if it's true, then it stands up to the evidence, and I think it does. In just a moment, we'll return to our previously recorded interview. But first, our missions moment of the week. I'd like you to hear a brief testimony from one of my students from the country of Jordan. His name is Emil.
Hello, my name is Emil. I am a student at the National Theological College and Graduate School here in Jordan. I'm from Amman, the capital of Jordan, and I'm about to graduate this summer. I became a student of the NTCGS because when I was looking for theological training, NTCGS was reaching out to my church to recruit students and did not require me to travel for long to get training and the courses, so it was really convenient for me to be in the class. NTCGS has helped me organize my biblical knowledge and introduced me to many valuable resources, and also encouraged me to tackle many theological issues I used to shy out from in the past. And all of this was done by professors and teachers who were also ministers of the word, ministering in many countries around the world.
If you'd like to learn more about NTCGS or how you can give to help students like Emil attend the National Theological College and Graduate School in Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, or East Africa, please visit ntcgs.org. That's ntcgs.org. Thank you for your consideration. Now back to our previously recorded program. Dr. Woodward, you have argued that the origin of life and the double helix molecule of DNA are game changers for intelligent design, often called ID. Would you please explain?
Sure. And for digging deeper into this area, the origin of life, there is one redone version of Unlocking the Mystery of Life called Origin of Life. That is about a 45, I think, maybe 50-minute documentary, and is absolutely fabulous. I don't know if it's available for free on YouTube, but it's called Unlocking the Mystery of Life Origin. And it's all, again, on the origin of life. The long story short videos I mentioned, and some of the other works put out by James Tour. Everybody taking notes, just take a tour of Tour. Okay, James Tour of Rice University. He's been, nominated for the Nobel Prize like 15 times for his work in nanoengineering of molecules. At the molecular level, he can just produce amazing things. But James Tour is probably the most outspoken critic of the origin of life theory happening by just chance interaction of chemistry. And so I would say that this was one of the points that launched intelligent design. It's been one of our strong suits, and it's just getting stronger by the year. I mean, Darwinian theory has to have a starting place, but the Darwinian theory can't work with the origin of life because you have to have replication and variation or mutation. But you don't get replication until you have a cell that can replicate. And now we know you need about 470 genes for the minimally functioning bacterial cell to even exist. 470 times an average of 1,000 letters in DNA, forget about it. And all the arguments that have come out, the mystery of life's origin came out in a new version with, I think, 6 new chapters added. I have it on my shelf. And to me, just the DNA model itself. And those, I know that many people are listening to this podcast just through the video, the audio track, but I have here, if I can just pull it up, my little DNA model that we developed at DNA and Beyond, part of the C.S. Lewis Society. You like the double helix there?
Nice.
Okay. The four colors, the blue and orange, we call it azure with tiger tangerine, the A and T, and the CG letters. The DNA alphabet has 4 letters to it. The C and G are the crimson and green. So you see the C and G. Some of the letters there are, the C, and they actually come apart. We made this model so you could open it up and show how replication happens.
Huh.
And they come together with embedded magnets. And the code of DNA is identical to a computer code. And amazingly, it even has on-off switches. So I'll show that there is this thing that looks like a Mickey Mouse with 3 ears. That little methyl tag is the on-off switch. If they're added to these red letters, these crimson letters, we call them the C letters, this gene is put to sleep. It's given a rest. But if those methyl tags are removed through a very powerful and precise machine, let's see if I can pull it off, then that methyl tag goes away, and the gene, it can be read, interpreted, and as it were, turned into a protein. Well, a typical cell, human cell, has 20,000 protein genes. There is stretches of DNA, the code for protein. And those protein codes then are their own separate, language with 20 letters. We call them amino acids. So when you have languages being translated from a computer type code, which retains the information, that's all it does, retains the information, to another code, we're talking about high intelligence of a level way beyond anything that, the people that do computer research today, could ever come up with. The idea of random processes producing this kind of technology, and it was already that way. And then when the ENCODE project revealed its findings in the year 2012, they said, well, we thought just like 2 or 3%, maybe 5% of the DNA is used. Now we know that 80% of it is used. And so we see kinds of DNA that don't even produce a protein. They produce a copy of themselves called an RNA, which can act like an air traffic controller or an umbrella or a spring or a placeholder in a book, and then 15 or 25 or 35 other functions that they have recently discovered. And so it almost is enough to make you dizzy as you hear, the new discoveries. But it's all very exciting for a Christian follower of Christ, for one who loves the Lord and wants to serve and be a witness and say how magnificently Romans 1:20 is being shown in the world of biology today.
Nice. Wonderful. Well, as we begin to wrap up our podcast today, Dr. Woodward, how would you engage with an open-minded yet skeptical university student like you were at that age as it relates to the evidence of design? How would you start? What would you say?
Well, that's really a good question. The one thing that just hops in my mind is to ask, if there were evidence that really throws a monkey wrench into Darwinian theory, that makes it look just completely, this is not working out. This is in sheer incredibility, going on steroids, as it were. If I could ask a friend of mine, and I'm going to be doing some of this in the next few weeks as I encounter some friends I haven't seen in years. I'm going to be maybe just dropping a question. I'm working in this area. I've been reading in this area. If I'm finding something that is really a strong indicator of design, would you be open to it, to hear about it? So I think that's kind of like almost like an on-ramp question. It's like testing the waters. If a person says, well, I don't think anything such exists, I don't think that's possible. Every bit of evidence, they may be like I was my freshman year in college. And if that's the case, you can say, well, I get that, I got it, but just theoretically, if there were, like the evidence that convinced the atheist scientist Thomas Nagel to change his mind, or Professor Galeriter up in Yale, or Michael Denton, who wrote Evolutionary Theory and Crisis. If there's any evidence among the various points that they've made that is legit, would you like to hear about it? And they say, no, you can say, okay, let's go get coffee, a ham sandwich or whatever. Change the subject and just pray for them. And I think one of the things that we can do, secondly, is that we can show how prediction in the Bible is it's eerie. It's really kind of fascinating and almost mysterious. How the predictions of science, a scientific theory should be able to make accurate predictions. If this theory X is true, then we should see A happening, B happening, and C happening. So you can extend out, make a risky prediction. That's what many of the design theorists have been saying about these junk DNA, is that we predict that function will be found, and they were proved right. So isn't it interesting that the Bible also sticks its neck out, just like a scientific theory, and makes predictions? And when you show Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22, the two great passages on the death of Christ. So Isaiah 53 has hints of the resurrection, but you take them to Psalm 16:10. You'll not let your Holy One undergo decay. And you take them to, you could go on to 100 other passages. A favorite of mine is Zechariah 12:10. Where in the context of a scene, it looks like the tribulation, almost looks like Israel today surrounded by its enemies. And it says, the Lord will come and fight for them, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they will mourn for him. I want to show that verse. I said, you see the picture? God himself is saying, ye shall look upon me. When was God pierced? Okay, it happened on the cross. And in the future time, the Jewish people will mourn for him. They will turn to him. And we can turn to him right now. So I think the predictions of the Bible, which are spectacular, and they mirror and almost like they're the perfection level of what science strives for in accurate theories and accurate predictions.
Wonderful. Well, I do have one more question. We homeschool our children. My wife does, I should say. She does a lot of work with our children and part of a classical conversations co-op. But for high school kids, what would you say would be an easy in? What would be one or two sources or resources that you would recommend for a high school level student that's one to help them to understand intelligent design?
Wow. Good question. And there are more and more resources that are coming available all the time. There is a high school textbook. I've used it with students of mine who are really in their college freshman level, but some of them actually are high school students who are dual enrolled, at the Trinity College campus where I've taught for 35 years. It's called Discovering Intelligent Design. And I don't have the names of the four authors in my mind, but one of them is Casey Luskin, Luskin, very famous, one of the top geology area experts of the ID movement. He's done tons of great writing and speaking, and he's very, very sharp. So Casey Luskin at Alia, in other words, the other authors that go with him, and that's Discovering Intelligent Design. I think that the videos that have been produced by Discovery, these hilarious and sharp, academically brilliant, but entertaining in a way that you wouldn't even imagine, that a cute little animated video would teach you so much in 10 minutes. And so the long story short videos, I think, are just mandatory watching, along with the longer documentaries I've mentioned already. Also, if you want to see a bit of nature, I think it's great to know about Living Waters. And there's the Metamorphosis movie, Living Waters movie, Metamorphosis, and also Flight, The Genius of Birds. Those are three films that are about an hour long. So you just have to pop lots of popcorn and make sure there's plenty of root beer and, Coke and Sprite around.
Nice.
But if you can actually confiscate the cell phones, and of course, homeschooling parents usually don't have a problem with that. But
Yeah.
I'm thinking of like junior high and high schools. But the whole idea of these visualizing resources we have produced by Illustra Media, I just think they're just beyond fabulous.
Nice.
Great.
And so I think that's what I would recommend.
Our time is up for today's episode on intelligent design. If our conversation today was of interest and help to you, I'd like to encourage you to acquire your own copy of Dr. Woodward's books. Again, they are Doubts About Darwin, Darwin Strikes Back, and The Mysterious Epigenome, subtitled What Lies Beyond DNA. You can purchase your own copies at Amazon.com. Also, if you benefited from the Bible and Theology Matters podcast, you may also appreciate our 6 to 10 minute videos, faith-affirming findings. In these videos, I describe and illustrate with pictures some of the most important discoveries from the field of biblical archaeology. They will affirm your faith in the historicity of Scripture and provide unique insights into the background of the Bible. You can find them on our YouTube channel, which is also called Bible and Theology Matters. Simply go to YouTube and in the search engine type Bible and A&D, Theology Matters, or go to our website and click on the YouTube link. Make sure you subscribe so that you can become aware of new content as it becomes available. Well, that's it for today, but until next time, never forget, Bible and Theology Matters, because what you really believe determines how you really behave.
Bible and Theology Matters podcast is a listener-supported podcast
devoted to helping Christians grow in their knowledge of the Word of God and in their relationship to the God of the Word.
To learn how you can partner with the Bible and Theology Matters podcast,
Visit us at BibleandTheologyMatters.com. That's Bible, A-N-D, TheologyMatters.com.